Your time here is over. Don't contact anyone. That's how it ended. 6 words. Cold. Sharp. Final. The CFO leaned back in his chair, smug in his tailored suit. Barely 3 months in the company, and already playing executioner. He delivered the line like it was routine, like he hadn't just wiped out 15 years of my life with a sentence. I sat frozen, staring at the packet on the table. My report. Hours of late nights. Numbers that told the truth, numbers sharp enough to cut through his polished arrogance. He hadn't even opened it. He didn't care. 15 years. I had held this company together. When clients threatened to walk, I talked them back. When budgets collapsed, I rebuilt them. When executives panicked, I was the one who steadied the ship. And yet here I was, discarded by a man who didn't even know half the systems I had built. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I saw people walking past. A few stole glances. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to notice. One young analyst, someone I'd mentored, caught my eyes for just a second. Her face showed shock. Maybe pity. Maybe fear. Everyone knew what was happening. And that was the humiliation, the deliberate, visible spectacle. The CFO tapped his pen against the desk. Security will escort you out. Your access will be revoked by noon. By noon. Not tomorrow. Not at the end of the week. Noon. He couldn't wait to erase me. That kind of urgency reeked of desperation. I kept my face calm. No anger. No tears. No reaction. Silence was the only dignity I had left. The door opened. Security stepped in. A man I saw every day in the lobby. We had exchanged smiles, greetings, the little kindnesses that keep a workplace human. But today, he was here to erase me. Escort her out, the CFO ordered. The guard nodded. His face was neutral, but I caught it, the flicker in his eyes. He didn't agree with this. I gathered my things slowly. My notebook. My pen. The half-empty coffee I'd brought in. I left the report on the table, untouched. Let him choke on the numbers without me there to explain them. As I reached the door, the CFO spoke again. And remember. Don't contact anyone. Not staff. Not clients. No one. Crystal clear. This wasn't just termination. It was quarantine. He wasn't cutting me off from the company, he was cutting me off from the truth. I walked across the office one last time. My heels struck the floor with sharp echoes. Heads lifted, then dropped back down. Whispers trailed behind me. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. The rhythm of work continued. But to me, it all felt distant, muffled. Like I was already a ghost in the building I had given my life to. At the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirrored doors. Tired eyes, straight posture, calm face. If this was the last image they remembered of me, it would not be broken. The doors closed. Silence. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't part of this place. No late nights. No impossible deadlines. No fires to put out. Just emptiness. And yet, under the sting, something shifted. Not despair. Not relief. Something sharper. Possibility. Because silence isn't weakness. Silence hides. Silence protects. And silence, when timed right, cuts deeper than any voice. In the lobby, the guard asked for my badge. I placed it in his hand. He dropped it into a box filled with others, names erased, faces forgotten. People discarded like me. Outside, sunlight hit hard. The city kept moving. Cars sped past. Horns blared. Life went on. I stood there, notebook in hand, repeating his words. Don't contact anyone. Why? Why so strict? Why so fast? Why the fear? This wasn't about me. It never was. The firing was a cover. A distraction. Something bigger was happening, and my silence was meant to protect them. But silence, in the right hands, doesn't protect. It destroys. I turned away from the building, my steps steady, my mind sharp. They thought they had silenced me. But they had only given me a weapon. And I was going to use it. The office door closed behind me with a metallic click. That sound felt final, like a judge's gavel. Fired. Silenced. Ordered not to contact anyone. My 15 years reduced to nothing in 6 words. I walked down the hallway like a ghost. No one looked at me, but I could feel the whispers. The kind of silence that buzzes louder than shouting. My badge still hung from my neck, but it was already useless. I was already erased. I left the building, holding a small box with nothing meaningful in it, just the scraps they let me keep. A photo frame. A mug. My old notebook. That was the sum of my career now. Outside, the air felt too bright, too sharp. Like the world had moved on instantly, while I stood still. But something gnawed at me. The timing. The CFO's face. The way he had been too calm, too rehearsed, like firing me was a performance. A distraction. Something was wrong. Back inside the company, the mood shifted almost immediately after my departure. The CFO, shiny, smug, 3 months in, thought he had cleaned up neatly. One firing, one problem removed. But less than 10 minutes later, an email landed in the CEO's inbox. A flagged invoice. Amount, $250,000. Marked, urgent. Sender, a vendor nobody recognized. The CEO's assistant printed it and rushed to the executive boardroom. Within minutes, the entire leadership team was summoned. The CEO sat at the head of the long glass table. He was pale, lips tight. The invoice lay flat in front of him like evidence in a courtroom. Who approved this? He asked, voice clipped. The VP of operations flipped through the paperwork. Confusion clouded her face. She shook her head. Not me. This vendor doesn't even look familiar. Eyes turned to finance. All eyes turned to the CFO. He adjusted his tie, leaned back, and forced a thin smile. It's a standard processing error. I'll handle it. But the CEO wasn't convinced. His knuckles tapped the glass table. This isn't pocket change. $250,000? Explain. Now. The CFO stayed quiet a beat too long. That hesitation told the room everything. Meanwhile, I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at the building I had just been thrown out of. I couldn't drive away yet. Something inside me refused to leave. I had learned one thing in 15 years, money doesn't just disappear. Numbers don't lie. And if a man like him wanted me silenced, it was because the numbers were about to speak louder than I ever could. My phone buzzed. A former teammate texted me just 2 words, emergency meeting. I smiled, bitter and sharp. So soon? Inside the boardroom, the CFO opened his laptop, typing furiously. He pulled up spreadsheets, graphs, explanations, anything to buy time. But then the CEO's assistant dropped another document on the table. Not just the invoice. A signature. My signature. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. The room went still. The CEO leaned forward. This Looks like her approval. He tapped the forged line. But she's gone. Fired this morning. And conveniently, she can't answer questions. The silence was suffocating. The CFO tried to smirk it off. It's a mistake. A clerical slip. We'll correct it. But the VP of operations wasn't buying it. A clerical slip doesn't fake a digital signature. Someone wanted this approved under her name. The air in the room changed. Suspicion sharpened. The firing no longer looked like discipline. It looked like cover. I didn't know all this yet. I was sitting in my car, gripping the steering wheel, piecing it together in my head. The CFO's arrogance. His timing. His rushed order to not contact anyone. He hadn't fired me because I was weak. He had fired me because I was strong. Because I knew too much. And if my hunch was right, he had just set himself on fire with the very paper he thought would bury me. The CEO's patience snapped. He pushed the invoice back across the table. Find out exactly where this came from, he ordered. Today. The CFO swallowed. His mask cracked. The VP of operations leaned in, her voice sharp. Convenient, isn't it? She's gone, and suddenly we find a six-figure invoice under her name. Almost like she was removed to keep her from answering questions. The CEO's eyes narrowed. Are you suggesting? I'm saying what everyone here is thinking, she cut in. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. The CFO shifted in his chair. Sweat glistened at his temple. That's ridiculous. She was underperforming. Everyone knows that. But no one nodded. No one agreed. Because in truth, everyone knew the opposite. I had been the backbone of finance for years. Numbers bent to my will. Clients trusted me more than they trusted the company's glossy presentations. And now, with me gone, the cracks were already showing. My phone buzzed again. Same teammate. This time, CEO furious. Invoice in your name. I exhaled slowly. There it was. Proof. They had used my signature. My reputation. My silence. But silence doesn't last forever. The boardroom grew hostile. Voices clashed. The CEO demanded clarity. The operations VP pressed harder. And then, finally, someone asked the question out loud. Why her? Why fire her this morning, right before this landed? The room froze. The CFO had no answer. None he could say without exposing himself. He rubbed his forehead, pretended to read through his laptop again. But his silence was its own confession. I sat in my car, staring through the windshield. The same thought kept circling in my mind. They thought they erased me. But the numbers, they always come back. And this time, those numbers carried my name. The CEO pushed back from the table, chair scraping hard against the floor. He stood, voice cold. I want a full investigation. Every invoice. Every vendor. Every approval. If this points back to her firing, his eyes locked on the CFO. Then we're not looking at negligence. We're looking at fraud. The CFO tried to protest, but his words fell flat. The tide had already turned. The room no longer saw him as the confident new leader. They saw him as the man who had tried to bury someone, and had just buried himself instead. Back in my car, I finally started the engine. For the first time all day, I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was calm. Because I knew one thing with certainty. They silenced me. But the numbers had just begun to speak. And soon, the world would listen. The security guard's footsteps echoed behind Elena as she walked out of the glass doors, the click of her heels too loud in the silence. She didn't look back. She wouldn't give the CFO that satisfaction. Her chest felt tight, but her stride never faltered. If they wanted her gone, fine. She would go with her head high. Outside, the summer air slapped her skin. Bright sunlight, traffic noise, the ordinary city life, it all felt jarring against the chaos inside her. 15 years of her life had just been erased with 6 words. Your time here is over. She walked down the street, each step pulling her farther from the building she had practically built her life around. Her badge was gone, her desk was locked, her email shut off. She had nothing in her hands but her phone. Still, she wasn't empty. Because what the CFO didn't know was this: Elena always prepared for storms. She sat on a bench, pulled out her phone, and opened a private folder. Inside were years of records, contracts, invoices, approvals, all the skeletons management thought no one noticed. Elena had noticed. She always noticed. But she didn't rush. No. She let the moment sink in. She let the sting of humiliation carve deep, because she knew it wouldn't last. She had been silenced publicly, but silence wasn't weakness. Sometimes silence was strategy. The office without her. Back inside the building, the mood had shifted. Elena didn't see it, but she could imagine it vividly. She knew exactly how that office worked without her. The finance team was scrambling. Without Elena's oversight, invoices piled unchecked. Vendor approvals hung in limbo. The CFO strutted in front of the staff, pretending control, but Elena knew his arrogance hid panic. He had fired her too fast, too publicly, too arrogantly. And that kind of move always left a trail. The whisper of trouble. Hours later, while Elena sat in her apartment with a glass of water untouched on the table, her phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague she trusted. Something's happening. Emergency meeting tonight. Stay alert. Her lips curved, not into a smile, but something sharper. Trouble had arrived faster than even she expected. She leaned back in her chair. Good, she whispered. Because she knew exactly what trouble it was. The missing piece. Elena had handled every invoice that mattered. She had signed off on contracts, flagged risks, blocked shady expenses. She was the quiet filter between chaos and collapse. And she remembered one file, one invoice in particular, $250,000 from a vendor nobody could trace properly. She had flagged it. Twice. The CFO had brushed her off both times. It's fine, he had said with that smug smirk. Don't overthink it. But Elena never overthought. She just knew. And she had kept her own copy. So when her colleague's message came, she knew that invoice had finally landed on the wrong desk. Inside the meeting. By 7 o'clock that night, the conference room was filled. Executives, directors, board representatives. The CFO at the head of the table, pretending calm, his suit immaculate, his voice steady. But in front of him, a single sheet of paper lay on the table like a loaded weapon, an invoice for $250,000. No project code. No approval. Just his signature. The CEO leaned forward, jaw tight. Explain this. The CFO adjusted his tie. It's routine. Nothing unusual. Routine? The COO snapped. $250,000 is not routine. Eyes shifted across the table. Whispers. Tension thickening like smoke. Someone asked the inevitable, was Elena involved in this approval? The CFO's silence lasted half a beat too long. Then he reached into his folder and pulled out a copy of Elena's termination letter. He placed it in the center of the table. She's gone, he said flatly. This is no longer her concern. The silence that spoke. But that silence, the pause before he spoke, was damning. The room caught it. They weren't fools. They saw what he was trying to do, bury responsibility under Elena's absence. Yet absence has weight. Her empty chair in the room, her missing voice, it spoke louder than any defense. Someone muttered, "Convenient timing, isn't it?" Another, "She flagged this before, didn't she?" The CFO's knuckles whitened around his pen. His polished mask cracked, just slightly, but enough. He could feel the room slipping from his control. Elena waiting. At the same hour, Elena sat on her couch, laptop open, her copy of the invoice glowing on the screen. She didn't know every word spoken in that boardroom, but she didn't need to. She had been in enough of those rooms to script the conversation herself. She poured herself tea, calm, patient. Because she knew what came next, the CFO would try to make her the scapegoat. And when he did, his own words, his own arrogance, would turn on him. The turning tide. Back in the office, voices grew sharper. Why fire her hours before this appeared? Why wasn't this flagged? Who signed off on this vendor? Every question landed heavier. The CFO's answers thinned. His control slipped like sand through fingers. He tried to redirect, to point at missing signatures, at oversight gaps. But all trails led back to him. The CEO finally leaned back, eyes narrowed. "Bring Elena in." The CFO's face drained of color. "That won't be necessary." But the CEO's voice cut like steel. "It is very necessary." Elena's phone buzzes again. Another message came through on Elena's phone. "They want you back in. Now." Elena stared at the screen for a moment. Not in surprise. Not in hesitation. But with the steady calm of someone who had seen this outcome long before anyone else. She closed her laptop, grabbed her bag, and stood. The CFO had silenced her in front of everyone. But now? Now the numbers were speaking, and the room was listening. She walked to the door. Her time wasn't over. It was just beginning. The door closed behind her, and the sound felt final. A single click that said more than all the CFO's empty words. Natalie stood in the lobby of the building she had walked into every morning for 15 years, but now she was holding a cardboard box like a stranger. Her ID badge, once a key to everything, was dead weight in her pocket. The receptionist wouldn't meet her eyes. Security hovered by the door, waiting for her to leave. They didn't say it out loud, but the message was clear: "You don't belong here anymore." She stepped outside. The air felt too sharp, too loud. For a moment, Natalie just stood there with the box in her arms, staring at the glass building. She could still see the floor where her office was, where her spreadsheets, her reports, her late nights lived. Her work was still glowing on those screens. But she wasn't allowed near it. Fired. Just like that. She walked down the street in a daze. People brushed past her, glued to their phones, laughing, arguing, living. Nobody cared that her entire career had been ripped apart in one meeting. Nobody knew that the company's success was built on her hands, her calculations, her vigilance. It didn't matter. To the world, she was just another employee walking out with a box. At home, she put the box on her kitchen table and stared at it. A photo of her and her team at last year's holiday party sat on top. They were smiling, holding champagne glasses. Most of them were gone now, pushed out, replaced by fresh talent that the new CFO kept bragging about. She picked up the photo, held it for a moment, then put it face down. Next was her coffee mug, the one with the faded, "World's Best Analyst" print. She'd won it in a joke contest years ago, but it had been her daily ritual ever since. She placed it next to the sink. There were papers too, though she wasn't sure how they got into the box. She hadn't packed them herself. They must have been swept in by the assistant who rushed her out. She pulled them out and frowned. An invoice. She sat down. The number at the bottom was impossible to miss, $250,000. Natalie flipped through the attached pages. Vendor name. Approval signatures. Department code. Her department's code. Her name wasn't anywhere, but her work was all over it. The formatting, the way the numbers lined up, she knew her spreadsheets like she knew her own handwriting. This wasn't an accident. Someone had piggybacked on her reporting style to push an expense through. Her stomach sank. The CFO's words echoed in her head, "Don't contact anyone." Now she understood. He hadn't just wanted her gone, he wanted her silent. Natalie leaned back in her chair. This wasn't just a firing. This was a cover-up. The next morning, her phone buzzed. A text from Claire, her closest friend still inside the company. "Claire, are you okay? Things are crazy here." Natalie's hands tightened around the phone. She typed back. "Natalie, what happened?" The typing dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Claire was being careful. Finally, the reply came, "Emergency meeting last night." Something about a six-figure invoice nobody can explain. The CEO was furious. Everyone's panicking. Natalie stared at the message. It was the same invoice sitting on her table. She felt a pulse of adrenaline. The company thought they had erased her, but the truth was already leaking. She spent the rest of the day combing through the documents in the box. Notes. Printouts. Drafts she hadn't seen in years. Someone had been careless packing her things, and now she had a puzzle to piece together. She sorted them into piles. Numbers that didn't match. Projects she didn't remember authorizing. Approval stamps that looked suspiciously copy-pasted. The $250,000 invoice wasn't an isolated mistake, it was part of a pattern. And Natalie realized with a cold shiver that she had been fired because she was the only one meticulous enough to notice. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the firing in her head. The CFO's smirk. The abruptness. The warning. "Don't contact anyone." He had underestimated her. He thought humiliation would silence her, that cutting off her paycheck would erase her fight. But numbers were louder than his ego. Numbers didn't lie. Natalie sat up, turned on her lamp, and opened her laptop. She began recreating the spreadsheets from memory. Vendor accounts, billing cycles, approval chains, she knew them like muscle memory. Line by line, she built the case. And the deeper she went, the clearer it became. The CFO wasn't just sloppy. He was funneling money. The $250,000 invoice was only the beginning. 2 days later, Claire called her. She sounded nervous. "Nat, I can't talk long. But you should know, everyone's asking questions." The CEO cornered the CFO this morning. He looked pale. "They think someone's about to blow the whistle." Natalie smiled faintly. "Maybe someone already has." Claire hesitated. Do you have something to do with this?" Natalie didn't answer directly. "Let's just say they fired me too fast. And they packed the wrong box." There was silence on the line, then a quiet laugh. "God, Nat. Be careful. These people don't play fair." "I know," Natalie said softly. "But neither do I." By the end of the week, Natalie had reconstructed enough evidence to trace $500,000 in questionable invoices. Every trail led back to the CFO. Every one of them used her reporting structure as camouflage. And now, with her gone, he had no one left to blame. She stared at the stack of documents on her kitchen table. It wasn't just paper, it was leverage. The company wanted her silent. But silence, she realized, was a choice. And she wasn't choosing it anymore. The boardroom was dead silent. No one moved. The $250,000 invoice glared from the projector like a warning flare. For a moment, the weight of it pressed down on everyone, but on me most of all. Because I knew what it meant. It wasn't just an error. It wasn't a typo. It was proof. Proof of everything I had been warning them about. Proof of the shortcuts, the lies, the way money had been shuffled without oversight. And now the entire leadership team was cornered, with me, the woman they had tried to erase, standing right there. The CEO's jaw tightened. Who signed this? He demanded again, his voice lower this time, carrying more dread than authority. The CFO didn't answer. He slid my termination letter further across the table, like a gambler doubling down on a losing hand. It was supposed to humiliate me. To finish me off. Instead, it backfired. Because in that moment, every executive in the room realized, if I was the one being silenced, then maybe I was also the one telling the truth. I leaned forward. My voice was steady, calm, but it carried. You wanted me gone. But here's the problem, you fired the only person who caught this. Eyes swung toward me. The CTO shifted uncomfortably. The head of operations started whispering to someone beside him. The silence broke into ripples of panic. The CEO's face turned red. Sit down. You're done here. But I didn't sit. I wasn't done. I pointed to the invoice on the screen. This isn't just a mistake. This is a chain of approvals. Signatures. Emails. A cover-up. And you know what's worse? It's not the first one. The room froze again. Because they all knew I kept records. Months of warnings. Months of being ignored. And still, I had documented every trail, every irregularity. Every time they told me to be quiet or not make waves. And now? Now those same records were sitting safely in a folder outside this building. I could see it on their faces. The sudden understanding. The trap snapping shut. The CFO tried to regain control. He forced a smile. This is exaggerated. She's just bitter. She doesn't have proof. I tilted my head. Don't I? The CEO glared at him. You said this was handled. The CFO stammered. I thought. You thought firing me would bury it, I cut in. But the thing about burying the truth is, it always has a way of resurfacing. And this time, it surfaced on a $250,000 invoice. The room erupted. Voices clashing. Executives demanding answers. Fingers pointing. Accusations flying. And me? I just stood there, watching the empire they built on arrogance and silence begin to collapse under its own weight. The CEO slammed his hand on the table. Enough. But no one was listening to him anymore. His authority was gone. His voice had no anchor. Because the real story wasn't his power. It was their fear. Fear of what came next. Fear of me. I picked up the termination letter and held it up for everyone to see. This piece of paper doesn't end me. It ends you. Because now, every regulator, every investor, every partner is going to see exactly how you tried to silence the one person who could have saved you. I let the letter drop back onto the polished wood. The sound echoed louder than the CEO's last command. Then I turned and walked out. Not escorted. Not silenced. Not broken. But with every eye in that boardroom following me, knowing the storm I carried with me wasn't just coming. It was already here. Days later, the fallout began. The CEO vanished from public statements. The CFO resigned for personal reasons. Investigators started circling. Investors pulled back. And me? I didn't need to say another word. The truth was already louder than anything I could have shouted. Because revenge doesn't always come with screaming or chaos. Sometimes, the sharpest revenge is silence, backed by evidence too strong to erase. And if you've ever been silenced, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever watched arrogance collapse under its own weight, then you know exactly how this feels. This was my story. And there are countless more like it. Welcome to Revenge and Reveal. Subscribe, because the next story might just be yours.